Thanks so much, Sharon.
Good morning. I'm Amy Collins, a commissioned lay minister and today worship associate of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Cleveland. Welcome to today's worship service, whether you're watching us live as it unfolds on Facebook or playing catch up at a later time or date on our YouTube channel. In case you're new to our community or to Unitarian Universalism, let me tell you a bit about us. As Unitarian Universalists, one of our core principles is recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every person. As a community, we recognize the interconnected web of all existence. As a pluralist faith, we're happy to have you join us whether you celebrate the earth, the goddess, love Jesus, or find inspiration and comfort from the reliability of science or humanist teachings. Our covenant with one another transcends race, gender identity, sexual identity, financial means, age, and all the other elements of who we are that some might use to divide us. Due to high rates of COVID transmission in the region, large group in-person use of the building is on hiatus from now through the end of January, and our services will be live streamed only. We plan to resume in-person services once we're on the other side of the current spike in COVID cases in our area. Our Regathering Committee meets regularly to ensure we're following the most up-to-date guidelines while also seeking opportunities for us to safely gather. Stay tuned for updates in the weekly email as well as during weekly services. We're on the second week of our Chalice series focused on our second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Check out our Chalice page on our website to learn more about Chalice and how you can dig a little deeper into it at home. If you're on our mailing list, you should have received an email from the worship team this morning with a link to download the order of service today. There you'll find all of the unison readings and hymn lyrics to enable you to fully participate while you enjoy the service. And I understand that if you're watching this at a later date, you can check out the information page to download a version as well from our YouTube channel or Facebook page. Today we have the pleasure of welcoming Reverend Beth Marshall back to our pulpit. Some of you may recall Reverend Beth from when she supported this congregation in an interim capacity just prior to the reunification of congregations a few years ago. Since ordination in 2003, she's served First Unitarian Church in Southold, New York, the UU Church of Blanchard Valley in Findlay, Ohio, and First Unitarian Church in Toledo, Ohio. Reverend Beth currently serves as the minister of the UU Congregation of Greater Canton. She lives in Oberlin with her husband, and between them, they're parents to 5 grown children and grandparents to now 8 grandchildren who live across 2 countries, live in 6 states, and in 4 different time zones. We know how much you enjoy greeting one another. Take a look at who's logged in on Facebook if you're watching this live, and I invite you to add messages of greeting to the feed as a virtual way of greeting one another for the next few minutes, or not minutes, but long enough to write a greeting. And remember that there will be a live social hour on Zoom after the service. In addition to lighting our chalice this morning, we'll light the second Chalica candle. If you would join me in our chalice lighting words, and for all of those of you who are here in the room with me, you can join me as well. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Our call to worship this morning by Reverend Sunshine Jeremiah Wolfe. This is a congregation that gathers in faith, not faith in one religion or one God or any one way. We gather in faith in the power of diversity, the power of love, and the hope of a world transformed by our care. We gather in ourselves and those around us. Not a faith that requires perfection or righteousness in one another. Rather, ours is a faith in the shared imperfection that we may learn to stumble and fall together. Faith that we will help one another rise to try again and again. Come, let us worship together.
And I invite you to join me in singing our opening hymn, 1064, if you happen to have a teal hymnal at home. If not, the words are in the order of service. Blue Boat Home. Oh, below me I feel no motion, standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean. Still my dry land heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now. Never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. Sun, my sail, and moon, my rudder, as I ply the starry sea, leaning over the edge and wonder, casting questions into the deep, drifting here with my ship's companions, all we kindred pilgrim souls, making our way to the heights of the heavens in our beautiful blue boat home. I give thanks to the waves upholding me, hail the great winds urging me on, greet the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. Each week, we take a few minutes during the service to lift up joys and concerns that may be in our hearts so that they may be shared in community. When we're in person, we invite folks to come forward during the music and place a glass stone in our chalice bowl to recognize those concerns that may be weighing on us or gifts for which we wish to express joy or gratitude. In our virtual format, I invite you to type any joys or concerns you may have in the chat, and as you do so, I will drop stones into the chalice for you. If you see that someone you know has shared something with the community, we encourage you to reach out with a call or other meaningful connection to express your support. Wherever you are, take a moment now to reflect on those joys and concerns that are in your hearts today. I'll place one last stone in our bowl for all of those joys or concerns that have not yet found words, and for those who cannot be with us this morning or today.
Well, good morning, everyone. Just to be 100% transparent, it is so weird to be doing this with no one here. So everyone's aware. We're all feeling it. It's a little strange. Today is the second week of Chalice, and we're thinking about justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And weirdly, that got me back to thinking about something I've talked about before in this context, which is I bought a house right before COVID. And it occurred to me to think about that because it's the weirdest purchase anybody ever makes. It's the strangest thing. It always starts in a place of deep idealism and purpose. And it's all about where you want to be and the people you want to be around. And it has this very social dynamic that very quickly in the process goes right out the window as you talk about many other things than the social dynamic of where you're going to live. So that process was a really strange one for me. And, if you've gone through that process or if you are a younger person thinking about growing up, like to prepare yourself, it really is the weirdest thing because you have to think about issues you would never have thought about, like sewer insurance and things like that, tax rates and all other kinds of stuff that sort of gets in the way. But the social element of buying a house came back and hit me real hard because something very funny and accidental happened in the process, which is I have a very good friend that you actually will all know, Amy Schwabauer. She's our spirit play teacher, a good friend of mine. And of course, when we bought our house, invited her over, you can come see the place. She's like, okay, great. Where is it? And we told her the address and she's like, oh, that's really interesting. I have an aunt and uncle who live on that road. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And my parents only live a few streets over. She's like, oh, interesting. That's a coincidence. And then she comes over to the house and she says, I'm pretty sure my great aunt lived here. And I was like, wait, what? Hold on a second here. And we talked and she figured it all out. And this is like her aunt and uncle live across the street. And she was like, put everything in perspective. And it turned out we had bought her family heirloom. We had no knowledge of this, no intention at all. It was not our plan. But we had accidentally turned into familial inheritors in the process. And what's funny is that we frequently have her over for dinner and things like that. So we sort of just feel like we've just become her great aunt again. So just now we are her friend aunts instead of her family aunts. Family connection is such a deep and profound thing. It really is the model, the sort of basis for so much of what we think about that phrase human social relations that's in that second principle. Family connection, this idea that this is what links us together, is this genetic blood bond that keeps us in place. And a funny thing I've sort of learned as I live in the religious sphere of things and we talk about that idea is that people are actually very defensive about the idea of how important family is. They're very insistent. There's a real sense in which this is one of these psychological things maybe we're all not aware of, but there is a real deep connection to the idea that family is that consistent thing in our lives. It even comes through, this is something I find really interesting, is there's a thing in human language and sort of wisdom where we will actually have sayings that we get, wisdom sayings or sort of quotes, things like that, where the meaning that we have established is weirdly the exact opposite of what it is supposed to mean. The classic one is a rolling stone gathers no moss. Now, especially in the 60s, Bob Dylan, all that stuff, the idea was, oh, be a rolling stone. You want to not have all the moss. But the original saying is something like a rolling stone gathers no moss and the wind sweeps it away or something like that, because the idea is that it doesn't have rootedness. It's not rooted into the earth. It's very movable. But the other one that comes up all the time when we're talking about families is the idea of blood is thicker than water, right? We've all heard that phrase. And if you've ever had a fight with your family or something, that'll probably come up in some nasty moment of interchange. Blood is thicker than water, how dare you, whatever. Interestingly, that quote actually means the exact opposite of what we've always inherited it to mean. It's actually supposed to mean something like the blood of friendship is thicker than the water of the womb. So it actually means that our relationships with people we choose, that we have friendships with, that we have other relationships with, are actually more established, more durable than some of the arbitrary relationships we have with family. This seems important to me, not because I think family is really unimportant, quite the opposite. I think that model is really important to us. But because, especially thinking about the second principle and thinking about all the sources of world religious wisdom that went into that, this is probably way oversimplifying things. But if there is like one core idea that you could say is really shared in these different religious traditions the world over, there is this teaching, this idea to push us past this instinct to only think of ourselves as connected to family. It's shockingly present in so many different traditions. We have familiar examples, if anybody is familiar with like the story with Abraham, for example. He invites these strangers who end up being visitors from God into his home. This idea of deep hospitality. Of course, the famous story from Jesus, the parable of the Good Samaritan. I was looking up some Islamic hadith on this, teachings of the Prophet. And there's actually one hadith that actually says, you should regard the stranger as if you've met your very own mother in the street. Like you should treat the stranger as if not only a family member, but like your deepest connection. And of course, there's an entire principle of teaching that the Buddha shares about this idea of the non-self, to see yourself in others and others in yourself in a way that makes you realize there's no difference between the two of you. To me, there's something in that, in the second principle of ours that we try to wrap our heads around. This idea of how do we answer that question, are you my family? Well, yes is the answer if we take these ideas seriously. We're everyone's great aunt whose house we bought. We're everyone's brother's keeper. We're all mothers to everyone. The deep truth is not about making our families less important. It's just the opposite. It's about using that model to tell us how it is that we should interact with everyone that we come into contact with. The idea is that that question, are you my family, should, if we become at least a little bit wise, a little bit incoherent, are you my family? Well, of course. It doesn't matter who you are, who's asking. The answer is yes.
I'd like to invite you into a moment of meditation, reflection, and prayer with these words by Mary Oliver. She writes, meditation is old and honorable. So why should I not sit every morning of my life on the hillside looking into the shining world? Because properly attended to, delight as well as havoc is suggestion. Can one be passionate about the just, the ideal, the sublime, and the holy, and yet not commit to no labor in its cause? I don't think so. All summations have a beginning. All effect has a story. All kindness begins with a sown seed. Thought buds toward radiance. The gospel of light is the crossroads of indolence and action. Be ignited or be gone.
This week, we take an offering to benefit Family Connections of Northeast Ohio. Family Connections engages families with young children to nurture social connections, enhance child development, and improve school readiness. They've been providing parenting support and educational opportunities for families with children from birth through age 6 for over 35 years, offering year-round free programs and services for families and children to learn and play together. Sign UUCC and then our zip code 44122 and put Family Connections in the notes of the for field. If that's all a bit too techy for you, you can still send a good old-fashioned check our way, and we'll be happy to add your contribution to the pot. So thanks in advance for contributing generously within your means. And please join in our acceptance of gifts words to accept our offering. We offer these gifts with gratitude, and we acknowledge the constant gifts of time, talent, and treasure that strengthen and nourish this congregation. As a reflection of our commitment to community within and without, our purposeful spirituality that is ever searching and growing, and our intentional actions that lead to greater justice in our congregation, our city, our nation, and our world.
Our reading this morning was written by Reverend Susan Cook Kitteridge. She is senior minister of the Old Meeting House in East Montpelier Center, Vermont. You may have heard of her father, the famed journalist Alistair Cook. She writes this: "I can knit, but I cannot sew new creations from tissue paper patterns. Recently, though, I have come to relish moments when I sit down and clumsily repair a torn shirt, hem a skirt, patch a pair of jeans, and I realize that I believe in mending. It is a time to stop, a time to quit running around. It is a time to sew actual rips together. I can't stop the war in Iraq. I can't reverse global warming. I can't solve the problems of my community or the world, but I can mend things by hand. I can darn a pair of socks. Mending something is different than fixing it. Fixing it suggests the evidence of the problem will disappear. When we mend broken relationships, we realize that we are better together than we are apart. And perhaps we are even stronger for the rip and then the repair. Mending doesn't say this never happened. It says instead, something or someone was surely broken here, but it will rise to new life. So too, my old pajamas, the fence around the garden, the friendship torn by misunderstanding, a country being ripped apart by economic and social inequity, and a global divide of enormous proportions. They all need mending. I'm starting with my pajamas. I believe that each of us is a healer. I believe that each of us can mend something. Some of us are called to heal the environment, others to heal relationships. Some of us are called to heal our systems of education and justice. Others are called to mend fences or frozen plumbing. Some are called to mend the technology that links us together, and others to mend their pajamas. The point being that each of us has something within that we can heal. We can mend something, small or large, monumental or seemingly insignificant. Perhaps you are familiar with the Jewish term, tikkun olam. It points our attention toward the moral imperative and human longing to heal the world. Rachel Naomi Raymond explains it this way: in the beginning of the creation, something happened, and the original light of the universe shattered into countless pieces. It lodged as shards of light inside every aspect of the creation. The highest human calling is to look for this light, to point at it when we see it, to gather it up, and in doing so, heal the world. She continues, this is an important story for our time because this story insists that within each and every one of us, frail and flawed as we may be, inadequate as we may feel, each of us has exactly what we need to repair the part of the world that we can see and touch. As Unitarian Universalists, this idea manifests itself in the way that we acknowledge the world and her people and how they are broken and hurting. For while we each carry a spark of the divine, what we sometimes call inherent worth and dignity, we too may be broken and hurting. This has been a long year or two, and few of us are completely unscathed. So what do we draw upon to refill ourselves? What do we draw for inspiration and healing? Sacred text, poetry, music, nature? I find myself often turning to stories of real people doing real work in the world. Some are grand and glorious, but most are unacknowledged by much of the world. A story. Once upon a time, there was a man who studied the Bible for 5 years. He noticed one word reappearing at the end of many of the Psalms. The word was Selah. In its original context, it is almost a directive, meaning to pause and reflect. It is as though the author is saying, you've read or heard my words. Now I want you to take a moment and think about them. Over time, this man who studied the Bible for 5 years expanded the definition to this: to pause and stop, to reflect and think, to take care of Mother Nature, and then to share. Today, he is an outspoken environmentalist, a healer of the land, a teacher committed to making the earth a better place than how we found it. The word Selah defines how he leads his life. His name is David Bamberger, and he grew up not far from here on a small family farm in Navarre, Ohio. Taking a cue from the Amish families that lived nearby, his family lived off the land as best they could. His mother was adamantly opposed to eating anything that was manufactured, and David and his 2 older brothers were often sent out into the nearby woods to gather berries and nuts and greens. This was during the Great Depression, so anything that they could gather off of the land was highly valued and never wasted. His mother modeled a spirit of welcoming and inclusivity that baffled her neighbors. Their farm was near a train stop, and it was not uncommon for men to jump off the train looking for work, hoping also to find a warm meal and a place to sleep. Though the family had little for themselves, it was more than enough for them to share with those who had even less. Years later, when his mother took a job at a local hospital, she invited all of her co-workers to a weekend picnic. Now, this is at a time where it was uncommon in that small community for Black families and white families to socialize together. But David's mother had her own ideas, and she invited all of her co-workers. She believed that if we worked together, we would socialize together. It was that simple. His early life was not easy or perfect. He would be the first not to romanticize it. But despite the challenges, those early years taught him to care for the land as if your life depended on it. It taught him to work hard for what you believe in, to persist creatively, even in the face of doubt and objection. He learned never to waste and to share everything. After he earned a bachelor's degree down the road at Kent State University, he entered the workforce, selling Kirby vacuum cleaners door to door. A series of friendships and adventures led him through a wildly successful career that included becoming part owner and co-chair of Church's Fried Chicken. Now, that would have been enough for some, but Bamberger had other ideas. Those 5 years he spent studying the Bible not only introduced him to the word Selah, but it gave him an idea. He knew, as well as he knew anything else, that if he ever had a ranch, it would be named Selah. Today, 5,500 acres outside of Austin are known as the Selah Ranch and Preserve. David Bamberger's Selah Ranch and Preserve. But that wasn't always the case. Before being rescued and eventually restored, those same acres were overworked, overgrazed, and were considered by most in the area as the very worst piece of property in Blanco County, the worst tract of land in the hills of Texas. No one wanted them. But that's exactly what he was looking for, a piece of land that could be brought back, could be healed, could be transformed into a thing of beauty. He believed that it could be done, and he wanted to be the one to do it. When he bought the land, there was no water anywhere. Multiple wells dug to a depth of 500 feet consistently came up dry. With only a smattering of topsoil, the small herd of deer were undersized and underfed. There were only a handful of birds and no wildlife to speak of. This was land that nobody wanted except David Bamberger. He saw the potential. He believed that it could be renewed and healed. It took years of hard work, sweat, and commitment to repair the land. It meant replacing acres of invasive species with deep-rooted native grasses to hold the rainwater. But in time, his persistence and willingness to try unconventional techniques brought water back to the land. Underground aquifers have since been replenished. Overflow from the renewed springs have not only transformed those 5,500 acres into a thing of natural and wild beauty, but now they also supply water to the city of Austin. Selah Ranch and Preserve is today considered one of the largest restoration projects in the state. To this day, he can be found working with students in the nearby Austin schools. They come to his ranch to experience the wildness of nature, to learn about water and insects, to watch the birds in flight, and to let their souls be touched. They come to stop and pause, to think and reflect. They come to care for Mother Nature and to share it. When I first heard about his commitment to Selah Ranch, two things stood out: his vision of what could be and his commitment to share the renewed land. He is still very much alive, and despite COVID restrictions, is sharing his message of healing the land. His work is continuing. I do believe that each of us, young or old, wealthy or poor, left-leaning or right-leaning, wants to do something to make the world a better place. Our methods may vary. Our resources and skill sets might be radically different. Even our goals may differ. But I believe that each one of us is capable of mending or repairing something. Some of us are able to shepherd the big projects through to completion. Others of us prefer to work with our neighbors. One might get more publicity and recognition, but that external validation doesn't reflect how deeply individual lives are touched or how great the need. Let me tell you another story. I had a dear neighbor for many years who quietly worked behind the scenes. She cared for her large, extended family, her church family, and anyone else who was lucky enough to cross her path, including us, her blessed neighbors. Until a series of mini strokes slowed her down, Linnell was virtually unstoppable, quietly mending one life at a time. I often hoped to have her stamina if I ever turned 80. Together with her husband, they raised half a dozen children of their own, and then they went on to foster many, many more. When she would speak of her kids, it was hard to tell if she meant the ones she gave birth to, the ones she fostered, or the ones that were simply taken under her wing because they were all her kids. Even after her husband's death, her home remained open to an assortment of teens and young adults in need. Some spent a night or two on her couch, others for a week or two in the spare room, though in the spare room, they would have to clear the donated clothes off the bed that were donated for the church sale. Linnell always fed them warm meals, gave them a safe place to be. She listened to their questions and made sure that they had responsibilities. As point person for her church circle, Linnell was always the one who knew who needed what. And we're talking about the most basics. The couple who needed a mattress because they were sleeping on the floor. Or the mother who was so grateful for a box of food because she was struggling to feed her kids. From an unused pack and play to surplus dishes, bed linens, and dressers, excess tomatoes, or anything that was on super sale at Aldi's. She knew who needed what. Linnell was a magician at reusing and reinventing what others discarded. She made new out of the old. As matriarch of her AME church and guardian of the neighborhood, Linnell dispensed care and wisdom for decades. She gently shared her belief of how God works in the world, what it means to be a good human being, and she often wondered what we might do to get along better as a diverse community of neighbors and friends. For all of her 86 years, she believed that community was built over a shared meal, just a handful of people around a table. She knew that from there, honest conversation could flow. She was a firm believer in the power of prayer, the power of a community garden, and the unwavering power of a strong cup of coffee. I treasure the mornings that we sat in the shade in her driveway or on our front porch swings, talking about how we might make our little corner of the world brighter and a little less anxious. I watched for years as Linnell embodied Tikkun Olam, doing something every day to heal her small corner of the world, even during COVID. A colleague in Maryland writes this: Tikkun Olam has more to do with discovering what people need, what we have to give, what we need to give others to feel more whole ourselves. We are a broken, hurting people, and the world is a broken, hurting place. We reach out to others, offering what comfort and energy we have, and we are brought closer to a wholeness where we are healed and can heal others. As a faith tradition, we are keenly aware of the depth and breadth of the challenges facing this world. At times, all that detailed awareness can leave us wondering what the efforts of one person can possibly do. I think many of us have been there, wanting to fix it all and not knowing where to begin. It is easy to become paralyzed in that moment, unable to choose one project over the others because they are all worthy. And to choose one over the other means the others are not touched. And yet it isn't that different from the old story about the woman who was walking the beach, throwing stranded starfish back in the water, one after another. When asked why she was doing it, because she couldn't possibly throw them all back in, she simply replies, because it makes a difference to this one, and she throws it back in the ocean. In the networks I'm connected with, I am seeing a growing yearning to heal, to mend. Yet on any given day, there is so much that needs our love, that pulls at us for our help, that calls for repair, that like a beach of stranded starfish, it can be completely overwhelming. The questions are always the same. Where to start? What need or project or problem or injustice will take top priority? Where do we find the resources, the funding, the person power? Making those choices is hard because it matters so very much. Early on in my ministry, I sat in on way too many well-intentioned meetings where 3 hours later, no decision had been made. No projects had been chosen because to choose one or two meant not choosing all the rest. And then I had a shift in thinking, which led to a different kind of approach. What if instead of trying to do them all, what if we chose a few, maybe one or two, but did them really, really well? And what if we did them on a scale that would make an impact, but that wouldn't exhaust our people? Some of these smaller and mid-sized congregations opted to do one local project and then one on a more national or global scale. and they committed to reevaluating their choices every year or so. One tiny but mighty local congregation chose to address poverty's impact on families in their community rather creatively. After realizing that opening a daycare or preschool were both out of the question for them, they came up with the idea of hosting a regular diaper drive in collaboration with the local diaper bank. Several times a year now, they collect several thousand diapers, which in turn allow parents to go to work or to school and their children go to daycare. Many daycare facilities require that parents supply their own diapers and wipes, and if they can't do that, the children can't attend, which then in turn means the parents can't go to work or go to school. A diaper drive 3 times a year will not solve the problem of poverty in their community. They know that. However, having a supply of fresh diapers helps a significant number of parents do what they need to do to care for their families and thrive, not just survive. A diaper drive will not heal the wounds left by generations of poverty, but it can perhaps help families mend their current situation just enough. And that just enough can make all the difference. This small congregation has found a way to embody both Tikkun Olam and Selah. They stopped, they paid attention, they thought and reflected, and then they found a way to move forward intentionally. A yearning to heal the world corner by corner manifests itself in a myriad of ways. One person may have the vision and capacity to reclaim 5,500 acres of overgrazed Texas hill country. Another, thousands of miles away, may make it her mission to see that young families have mattresses and soup and bread. And a tiny congregation might just commit to making sure that young parents have enough diapers and wipes so their children can go to daycare while they go to work. It might even start by mending those old pajamas. Despite our limitations, there is a yearning to heal the world, even our one small corner of it. We don't need to be Desmond Tutu, Mahatma Gandhi, or Malala Yousafzai to make a lasting impact. The list of needs and challenges will always exceed our individual ability to meet them. That's the nature of the world we live in. Part of embracing Selah and living in the spirit of Tikkun Olam is recognizing what is possible and then stopping by doing nothing less. There is good news, and that is this. Our larger faith community is built on a wide network of diverse congregations with skills and resources different than our own. A wide base of interfaith connections, and lastly, countless secular organizations on the state and national level. The extent of this network means that collaboration is possible. It multiplies the potential outcomes and reduces individual workloads. And that is a huge strength that can't be ignored. The other good news is while the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Cleveland has a relatively short new history of its very own, the roots of the 2 congregations that formed it go deep into the ground, much like the roots of the native grasses, able to restore water to a parched and thirsty land. Looking right around here, both history and present are in part defined by visionaries whose ideas burned bright and clear. Without fear of challenge or obstacle, they recognize that the fire of commitment is not a simple flash of lightning, but a beacon calling us to heal the world, one small bit at a time. We close this morning with words by Reverend Greg Stewart. Not so long ago, he served First Unitarian Church of Cleveland as their minister of religious education. He wrote, The decisions we make may not always be rational, but they come from our hearts and our sense of urgency that the world is broken and we have a limited time on this earth to make it better. So may it be. Allan. Selah.
Speaking of the fire of commitment, good segue. You'd think you chose that hymn, Beth. Please join in our closing hymn, The Fire of Commitment. If you have a teal hymnal, it's 1028. If not, the words are in the order of service. Guiding hands and hearts and spirits into faith set free from fear. When the fire of commitment sets our minds and souls ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin. From the stories of our living wings, a song both brave and free, calling pilgrims still to witness to the life of liberty. When the fire of commitment sets our minds and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin. From the dreams of youthful vision comes a new prophetic voice, which demands a deeper justice built by our courageous choice. When the fire of commitment sets our minds and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, and our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin.
Our closing words by Mahatma Gandhi. A principle is a principle, and in no case can it be watered down because of our incapacity to live it in practice. We have to strive to achieve it, and the striving should be conscious, deliberate, and hard. Go in peace. Amen. Blessed be. As we extinguish the chalice, join me at home, if you will. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Can I read some of the comments before you show them?
Good job, team. I was gonna say, this is, when it's weird, now we're out of it. And
It's weird.
it's like,